Hello viewers, I had summarized about open spaces, urban open spaces in the previous lecture, and in this particular lecture we are going to go into the details of it, the technicalities of it as to how things come into play. I have a short video explaining about the whole process of urbanization, how buildings come into being, how the old buildings get broken into pieces and new building structures. So, the constant changing urban fabric, the constant changing urban landscape will be viewed through this video, a short video. So, here you see there are several buildings coming into play. It is a model of all these buildings and putting these buildings together to create a atmosphere or environment. This is a bus station with all the amenities surrounding it and the people in between. An old building replaced by a new building, and cars which have become center to the whole urbanization process. So, this is all about getting urbanized. What exactly is a city? A city is the manifestation of people coming together, of buildings and urban amenities and good infrastructure. Now, in this particular slide, we are going to talk about how people have thought about cities, how cities have come into being. So, city has not been a geographical accident per se, but then now, as of now, if you when you see with cities in developing nations having so many slums, so it reflects that there is inadequate housing, a glorified trading post. City initially came into being because of economic reasons. Of course, all of us know cities to be engines of economic growth, a communication node. Now, to outer world, the city becomes a communication node. Any developed nation comes to know is said to be a developed nation only because of urbanization, urbanized population. So, the more the more population that lives in urban areas in a country, the more developed the nation is. And a city is a cultural symbol. After all, the world over, people come to the cities to see what exactly does it represent, what the country represents. It's a focus of power. The capital cities are generally the focus of power, but then not to undermine the other cities, the other cities also tend to have a lot of power vested into them, into deciding as to how the city would be, and a multiple form of art. Well, because it is juxtaposed with several in landscape around, several ambient landscape around, whether it is water, whether it is green trees and parks and plazas, it all juxtapose the city into being what it is. When I say it's a geographical accident, what I meant, if you see through this slide, it's a favela in Caracas. Most Indian cities, including a city like Bombay, which is an economic center or the financial capital of India, 60% of the city's population actually lives in slums. It varies from 20 to 60% depending on how large the city is, what kind of economic growth does it have, and the cost of living, of course. As a glorified posts or ports that we call it, all these cities that you see on the slide, whether it is Sydney, Los Angeles, Hong Kong, all of them came into being because of its geographic location and because it was a trading post. In context of India, the development of the other three metropolitan cities, which is Mumbai, Chennai and Kolkata, happened only because they are one, port cities. That is where the trading used to happen. The East India Company came, built their ports. Well, in case of Madras, all of you know that there were four colonial or imperial powers that resided on the Coromandel coast across and did plenty of trade from here. So, but can the city be only a trading post and continue to survive? Well, it is not so. Is it a communication node, a node where people align that all of them, all the international offices tend to have it as in these cities? whether it is New York, Singapore, Shanghai, well, it's established that it's good to have most companies have a small office in Manhattan because the cost of rent is pretty high. But then it is the gateway to the any communication that you have to the external world. And if you see in other cities, like the symbols, the images that come across, if you in each of these cities are, in case of New York, you have the Statue of Liberty that holds the New York's image together. Whether it is Singapore, you have the lion, which works as the iconic symbol of Singapore. And in case of Shanghai, you have the tower. Well, in case of Bangalore, the Vidhan Sauda, which was created in way back in 1960s, is the symbol of power of how Bangalore is to be related to. So, I have a short video again that showcases the skylines of the cities and will generally show you how the cities have formed together. At the dawn of the morning, you see the city rising up, getting ready to get on to work. And here you have the skyscrapers, the cars. And in this video, you will see this is a developing nation, sign of developing nation, where you have slums and favelas. The video shows the density of the population, the region that resides. This is Cape Town, having huge number of population residing in low-lying area. This is Dubai. Every city is earmarked with its landmarks. Here you have another landmark, but here the commonalities of things. This is Venice. So, it is the environment, the economics and the power that's vested into the cities that makes the city the way it is. And if you see the landscape per se, you know, whether it is day or night, the city looks beautiful if the spaces around it and the people are beautiful. Our city is a focus of power. This is demonstrated by the capital cities when you have this very wide axis, the clear wide axis that you see in Brasilia, which is this clean axis, or whether it is Washington DC or Paris, New Delhi, the scale is monumental. And when you see the cities across the world tend to build a capital, because that's capital is the center of power, and it establishes what the country stands for. In this case, in this context, the axis is laid by these clean green open spaces around, which creates a public realm which is generally enjoyed by the citizens of the city. And these axis also works and demonstrates the power of the country during the marches, which is during their independence or republic days. There is a showcase of power in all these axes, whether it's the Rashtrapati Bhavan, which on the 26th of January, where you see the parade of the entire militia of the country walking past us. In case of London, here we have the Westminster Abbey's photograph, the palace where the Queen resides. Yeah, and in Islamabad, the road which links the highway to the city in general. Is it a cultural symbol? Most cities are a cultural symbol which have existed from eternity, and the built space is the remains of the past. So, it tends to become the symbol of culture, not just of the city but also of the country. It also with the changing landscape, with the changing urban landscape, these cultural symbols tend to hold the city together. In case of Baroda, the Gaikwad Palace that exists. In Madurai, we have the Meenakshi Amman Koil. In Barcelona, the Familia Grada church that Antonio Gaudi had, the unfinished work of Antonio Gaudi that existed. In Lahore, the Jami Masjid. and in Istanbul the Hagia Sophia. These are centers of power, a reflection of culture, and the surrounding, the urban landscape surrounding it is, although it predates the building itself, has completely and constantly transformed. There's a small video that I want to show which reflects art as a medium to create awareness in the city, and it in turn gives the multifold things that multifold elements that that bridges the city together, that knits the city together. So, here you have the state of electricity, the usage of electricity in a small city called Brighton City in UK, in Tidy. And this street is called Tidy Street, where the activists have used art as a form to reflect and showcase the usage of electricity in Tidy Street when compared to what is the the city of Brighton's average. And this is a reflection of the graph as to how it is going. That is the average, it is below the average throughout, but constantly rising. The citizens, they define as to how they want the city. They want an ecologically well to do city. Now, we talk about planned, unplanned, semi-planned cities. The cities constantly are living organisms and constantly are adhered to change. It grows in a planned or phased manner, but sometimes the planners do not have adequate time to reach out to the unplanned portions. So, if city is a center of economics and tend to have a lot of growth all around, it could completely change and transform the periphery or the suburban parts of the planned city. Here the city planning authority needs to control the growth and understand the pattern of growth, and the old parts of the city needs to be revitalized in the process. Now, I am going to talk about two cities which are planned and unplanned examples of the city, and you could see the constant change that has happened in both these cities. A city like Chandigarh, which has been divided into sectors here, and you have clear access as to where and how the city would develop, and clear indication as to where the growth centers are. So, these are parts of planned city. Problem with the planned city is that the planning came before the people, because Chandigarh is known to be a city of refugees, where the refugees from West Pakistan or West Punjab came into live into this nice city designed by Le Corbusier. It is a designer city. Whereas in Istanbul, there was a regulation or there was a law when they built the city that whatever is built from dusk to dawn would remain with the people, and which is why the city was built by people and is seen to be, it has clear access, all roads are existent, the bazaars are existent, which becomes a natural space, natural markets for the people. And unlike Chandigarh, which is in a gridiron pattern, there exists a pattern, but then it is vibrant as a city. Culture of the city does not change because we desire to change it. Culture changes when the organization is completely transformed, and the culture reflects the realities of the people working together every day. I will just show a short video as to how Beijing has changed from what it used to be as a city. So, now with all the modern technology, flyovers and cars, the city has completely transformed. You have these big malls, shopping malls and large buildings, high skyline, which reduces the whole public realm into a small space, and see how congested it becomes. And when you look at these multi-story buildings, large banks and plazas coming into being, it is a sign of progress, no doubt it is a sign of progress, but it is a city which is not, which the people who have lived in the past could not recognize at all or could not relate to, because the whole culture of that city changes. Earlier you used to know the neighbor, and now the neighbor itself becomes your neighbor is an alien to you, because there is little interaction, people have their own privacy, and cities have invited large migrants. So, nobody knows anybody in this particular space. In the process of urbanization, it has also created a lot of issues for the cities. Issues such as inadequate mass housing, which has caused a lot of slums in the being. Unavailability of public transportation has led to a rise in private vehicles, which has in turn increased vehicular congestion on the roads, and which is why most cities have large traffic jams, and to reach from one point to another it becomes inevitable unless you start on time. Then pollution. Cities have also been a cause of big pollution, large rising pollution, whether it is in the form of air or water, and since we generate piles of garbage which we don't have a way to sort of which we are not able to reuse, recycle, and are unable to segregate it at source, goes into dump yards, and in turn it becomes a growing pile of garbage hill and cause of a problem of urbanization. Then there is energy crisis. Energy crisis because one, electricity doesn't come cheap, somebody has to pay for the electricity. So it's the suburban, or rather the rural area, the countryside, which pays for the city to be electrified, and because it increases, it invites a large amount of migrants from different social structure, and there is so much of inequity and inequality in the city, in cities, it increases crime and social issues. And because of inadequate space, open space, cities tend to choke because of inadequate open space. I have another short video about Rio. People are at the center of all the city's issues. Unless people own up the city, love the city where they live, and are able to not relate to the city, city is of inconsequential means. So a city should be ideally a space where it should not outdistance the man's walking power. If it outdistances the man's walking power, it is no more a compact city, and if it's not a compact city, you require private vehicles to move around. Of course, growth is inevitable and also desirable, but it destroys the character of the community, it destroys the environmental balance of the city, and the question is not whether you are a part of that world, or because it keeps changing, and the question is how it would change. What is the city but people? William Shakespeare said once. Well, it changes because the people change, and not because people's needs change, not because it needs to be changed. Clearly then, city is not a concrete jungle, it's a human zoo. That's what Desmond Morris says. When we go to a zoo and watch the animals around, they behave exactly the same way we want them to behave. So cities are a persona of how people want the city to behave. So this is a video of New Orleans, and it had a catastrophe, the Katrina. This is just after the Katrina, when the entire city was blown away in the storm. The new structures that were built did not reciprocate what exactly was the character of the city then. And Brad Pitt used to live in New Orleans, and this particular architect who's talking over here used to live in that same neighborhood, talks about how often they used to see Brad Pitt move around. Now this is an experiment that a public artist did for a dilapidated space, uh, a space which is not used by anybody anymore. In this particular building or dilapidated structure, the artist tends to put stickers of as to what the space should be, or what people aspire the city to be, or what people aspire their neighborhoods to look like. Here she puts these blank stickers, and which says, I wish this was a particular thing, and people who the passerbys write. If they write, it should be a green area or a dog park, to whatever the space they aspire it to be. So, after all, the city becomes what you aspire for, what you want it to be, rather than what it is. That's the power of people in changing the city and changing the city structure. So, they talk about their needs, and of course, livable, has to be livable. Unless it is livable, people will just ruin. We don't deal with issues of urban sprawl in nature, but most American cities have gone to the extent of an urban sprawl. We have a different set of problems in India. In India, urban sprawl occurs because it's just is unlivable to live in the city. There is no space for the poor, and eventually people tend to move out of the city's center. So, the expanding city boundaries and expanding carbon means expanding carbon footprint, because people have to commute from the suburbs to the city. Low density developments in suburbs increases infrastructure costs. Most Indian cities, the urban infrastructure cost is expensive, it's pretty high, which is why even in the suburban areas they tend to populate the suburbs, and the city center is comparatively lesser crowded than the suburbs now, and it leads to increasing dependence on the private transport, which is why we have a lot of traffic jams, a lot of cars, a lot of bikes coming onto the streets. So, here is a short video on how Phoenix as a city has changed. Any city, however small, has this divide, that rich and poor divide, and there is a war which is they are at war with one another. This is what the famous philosopher Plato says. Here, when you look at it, the city of Phoenix had a huge urban sprawl, and although that it was marked with all these nice wide roads, the only way people could commute were through the roads and through the private vehicles. There was a garden city concept started by Ebenezer Howard, and when you see Ebenezer Howard's garden city concept, it was like there is a mother city, and then there are the small cities around it. People tend to transit from one space to another in search of work. These cities couldn't survive without each other. So, the satellite cities were dependent on this thing, but in this case, in United States, they tend to only keep the city limited, because the urban infrastructure is not extended beyond one particular place where people wouldn't stay. So, that is how they control it. In each of these urban centers tend to have their own the other infrastructure, and eventually it comes together. Yeah, so until now we spoke about how the city forms, how the city structures, what are the various issues that that cities have, how each cities are intending to balance the environment, the ecology, the economy of each of the space, and how the landscape surrounding the city changes, because modifies as the city grows into another being. In this short videos that I had shown, we try to speak about how these cities are binded together by the landscape surrounding it, whether it is the streets or the urban or the parks and plazas, and the sprawl that I showed you in the recent video about Phoenix, that also is a resultant of how the people want their cities to be. People prefer to be in large condominiums with their own swimming pool, tend to live in these large open spaces. People love open space, which is why they want to move away from the city center. And this is the keynote issue, is that how do we consolidate this open space in the city structure, in the existing city structure, so that it makes it more livable. Thank you.